chats, Leah and I, on, okay, what are the questions that everyone's going to find the most interesting? And we toed and froed on this for a while, and with Katie as well. And we actually reached out to the team and collected some questions. And, you know, some of the ones that came up were around confidence in the workplace and confidence at home. And it obviously plays a very big role in our happiness. And we talked earlier before everyone joined about confidence being a topic we all think about, whether secretly or openly. So yeah, the first question, is confidence something that is a mindset, or is it something that it's simply actions we take, right, that perhaps portray confidence? And that's a debate we ended up finding ourselves in. So what's your perspective, and how would you describe confidence?
In a nutshell, I like to describe confidence as somebody that wouldn't choose to be anybody else. And at its most basic form, that's how I describe it now. There is the argument that you can have confidence in doing something, so that's, you know, taking action on something. But when you've got self-confidence, it's connected to your self-worth and your self-esteem, and therefore that's fundamentally the foundation of your self-confidence, which therefore makes taking action on something, whether you've got the experience to be so-called confident about it, that's what makes the difference in taking action on those things. So sometimes people misinterpret that person's confident because they're doing this thing. Like, you could have a footballer that's playing football for England, but then they could come off that football pitch and maybe get some criticism and then be floored by it. Now, that's not a confident reaction, but they might appear confident to everybody else because they've just gone out and knocked it out the park and played a really good game. So how we actually interpret the world and how we view ourselves is what I consider as self-confidence, and all the other stuff are nice to have on top.
Okay.
So kind of just jumping in on, you know, looking confident. A lot of us have different types of personalities, and a lot of times we describe personalities as being extroverted or introverted. And I think we have this misconception that being confident is an extroverted personality trait. Is that true, or is that an actual misconception?
I would personally say it's a massive misconception. It's a very common one. So I agree with you that I've heard people say the same thing. You can be very extrovert and very unconfident, and you can be very introvert and very confident. So often people have a connection that, or have a misconception, should I say, that if you're louder, you're the loudest person in the room, that person is more confident. Sometimes people overcompensate with the extroversion, and that is often driven by lack of confidence. It's almost like an overcompensation. Now, somebody really confident in themselves doesn't need to overcompensate, and that's the fundamental difference. Whereas I've met plenty, I know of plenty introvert people, and they still feel very sure in themselves. So it's a misconception, and I don't think it has any correlation at all to real confidence, just the way people interpret it.
That's really interesting, because usually when you think about introversion, you think about people who are pretty shy, who don't really come out of their shell. What is it about introverts specifically that sort of gives them a little bit of a difference in when it comes to confidence, and in contrast to people who are maybe more extroverted and may look more confident?
Fundamentally, introversion and extroversion is about how you gain your energy. That's what it comes about. So, but that often goes hand in hand with interpreting somebody as shy or interpreting somebody as loud, whatever. But what introversion and extroversion actually is if somebody is an extrovert, if they're like a severe extrovert in particular, they spend time on their own, it can drain them. Whereas actually they gain their energy from spending time with other people and being that high energy kind of person. An introvert person will spend time with other people, and they can find that quite exhausting and draining as well. But then when they spend time on their own, they regain their energy. That's how they recharge the battery. And that really is fundamentally what introversion and extroversion is at its most basic level. Now, you can get somebody introverted and unconfident, but you can also get somebody extroverted and unconfident, and vice versa for both. So it doesn't really create a direct correlation at all. But once people understand what introversion and extroversion actually is, then it actually removes it quite far away from confidence. It's just a misconception around the appearance that we're seeing and our misinterpretation of that.
So with that in mind, then, I'm hearing that confidence is a lot closer to mindset than actions per se, and what we project out if we're loud, etc. How do you then go about teaching or coaching in confidence if it isn't just a, these series of traits or things that you show people that you are?
Sure. So when you have a stronger mindset, taking action becomes easier, right? So it's not just one or the other. The two are interlinked, but I think the foundation comes from the mindset. So just to be clear on that, I'm not saying that taking action doesn't require some form of confidence, but it doesn't mean that if somebody is taking action that they are therefore confident. That's the difference. But if you have the mindset in the right place, taking action becomes easier. So in terms of, sorry, and what was your question after that?
And coaching, like how do you go about coaching confidence, especially at the senior level that you're coaching at? Yeah.
So with like execs and CEOs and directors, etc., there is often a misconception that when they get to that level, they're very confident, otherwise they wouldn't have got to that level. Whereas a truly confident person is sure of themselves in all regards. So I don't actually work with anybody unconfident. What I tend to find when I'm working with people at that level, they have measurement systems that leave them in an unconfident place when they're using the wrong measurement system for them. So let me give that as an example. And this isn't just for execs, this is just generally across human beings, right? But take public speaking, for example. A lot of people have anxiety over public speaking. Now, actually, that person can be a very confident person, but have anxiety over that public speaking. The reason why people have anxiety over public speaking is they think the problem is the anxiety over what if they get it wrong and everything else. I know that when somebody has anxiety over public speaking, it's related to an attachment to validation. So the thing that's triggering the anxiety is, what do they think of me? Do they think I'm good? Do they think I'm credible? If I make a mistake, will they judge me? If I make a mistake, will they criticize me? That's what it is. So it's not about actually building them to have a thicker skin and be more resilient about the fact that they've got this anxiety over public speaking. Where the real that comes in is that you detach from the thing that is triggering the anxiety. So in those moments, if somebody's having anxiety around public speaking, it's not that they're necessarily an unconfident person, but they're feeling unconfident in that moment because of their attachment system to what success looks like. So when they realign the measurement system to something that's more internal rather than external, then they can go into those situations and not have to fight the anxiety, because the anxiety is only a symptom of something else that's going on. So yeah, so hopefully that makes a bit more sense. But when people are measuring themselves externally, they have zero control over that. And that happens a lot. What people think, how people are going to judge us. You might be facing a room that, the dog died in the morning, or they get stuck in road rage on the way in, or the partner announced they wanted a divorce or something. I know they're extreme cases, but something bad could have happened. But the personal stage has literally zero control over. So of course that's going to trigger anxiety because you're trying to control the uncontrollable. So when you focus on controlling what you can control, which is your own measurement systems of what success looks like, you detach from the things that is triggering the anxiety. Therefore, people can do these things with a higher sense of calmness and less anxiety, basically.
Wow. Okay. So if I was to think of that practically, let's say I'm going into a presentation, is the first step recognizing, let's say I am anxious about it, recognizing maybe it's because I think this individual won't think I'm competent if I don't perform. So first of all, I've recognized that. Then from there, I suppose what would be the next step? Is it finding something else to get my validation from?
I'd drop the validation. I mean, it's easier said than done, and that's kind of where I can go into months with somebody how to drop that type of validation. But first of all, what you said about the emotion side of it, absolutely embracing that. It's the fighting those emotions that distorts them. So if you're in a situation where the anxiety is kind of consuming you, that fighting, like go away, I don't want it to fit, and people start, grabbing onto the desk and taking deep breaths, and that often just kind of stirs it up and makes it even worse, because they're trying to fight something that the body is saying, I need you to pay attention right now. It's part of your fight or flight. It's fear-based reactions is part of our DNA. So first of all, those fear-based reactions aren't triggered when we have a different measurement system, but when they are triggered, fighting it is going to distort it, and that is not helpful for you. So actually embracing those emotions, but yeah, I am absolutely terrified, maybe not even terrified, but yeah, I am scared at the moment, and that's okay. And that level of acceptance, yeah, this is uncomfortable. I don't enjoy feeling this way, but it's better for me just to embrace it. Like my legs aren't going to drop off, my eyes aren't going to drop out, my arms aren't going to drop off. Like this is just a feeling, and it's an uncomfortable feeling, but it's basically trying to tell me something. Maybe I'm a bit more nervous than I first thought I was, but I'm not going to fight it. I'm just going to embrace that feeling. And normally it's the embracing of these emotions that makes it like basically fade away, as opposed to fighting it, that almost fans the flames. So that's the first part, and that goes for all emotions. That goes with grief, it goes with sadness, it goes with jealousy, it goes with anger, all of these things. And the second part, in terms of the measurement system, I generally work with my clients to work around what values that they can measure themselves on. So first of all, have they respected themselves in terms of, have they prepared as much as they could? Because they can't control the audience's reaction, but they can increase their chances by preparing as best they can, you know, making sure that they're familiar with the slides, that there's no silly spelling errors on them or whatever. So they've got that side of it. You can also go in with acceptance of how the audience react, how I'm feeling, and being okay with how I'm feeling. You can go in with curiosity, because often when people go in with a sense of anxiety over something, they look for evidence to prove that the thing that they're thinking is real. So they might be sat in the audience and see somebody yawn, and then their brain might immediately go to, that person's yawning because they think I'm boring or they think I'm rubbish. When actually that person might be yawning because they've got a newborn baby and they've been up all night, or maybe that person is really sick and they've had no sleep, and it's flattering that they're even there because they should really be in bed, like resting up kind of thing. So understanding that the stories that we hear are often lies to ourselves, because we can't have any certainty of why people are reacting the way they are. So going back to the values, that's curiosity. So if I'm in a speaking gig and I see somebody yawning, my first thoughts are, I wonder why that guy's yawning. The truth is, I don't know. I can't say he's yawning because he doesn't like me. I don't know why he's yawning. I prefer him not to be yawning, but he is yawning and I don't actually know why. And that's honesty, which brings into another value. And you can be curious, you can be honest, you can be accepting, you can be brave. Yeah, I tick the brave box because I got up there and I did the thing that I'm scared of doing. You know, you can even talk about openness and honesty as a value as well. And if necessary, say to the audience, wow, it's pretty nerve-wracking up here. So if you see me shaking for this first couple of minutes, like, bear with me, it's pretty scary when I'm up here. Like, if you need to go there, you can also go there. So when people leave the stage, one last thing as well, rather than when people are up on stage, you can also focus on, my motive here is to give. I'm going to serve this audience. I'm not going to worry about taking anything from them, like validation or approval. What I'm looking for is just to give to this audience. And if these people walk away with learn one thing, then my job has been done. So when people go up with this measurement system, no matter what the audience react like, they can walk off that stage and say, yep, I prepared. Yep, I was curious. Yep, I was honest. Yep, I was brave. Yep, I was curious, like whatever they are. And then that becomes the win. And you completely let go of the outcome of them. But the point is of measuring it this way is that you're less likely to get the anxiety. And it's the anxiety that derails us. It's the anxiety that makes our brain go blank. It's the anxiety that makes us go blotchy in our skin, or make, or stutter, or whatever it might be. So this is fundamentally about being able to perform better, because you're not battling with this anxiety in the same way that you would have done if your measurement was on something that you can't control, which is based on what the audience are reacting like. So that's the fundamental difference. But then people often perform better when they have this measurement system, and then they come off and they feel bloody brilliant, because they have genuinely had it so much smoother for them. It was more comfortable for them. So then they think, wow, I just did that and it felt great and I was in control and I didn't have the anxiety and everything feels better. Then people build more confidence to do it again. So it's realigning what that measurement system looks like, and quite frankly, repetition.
That's brilliant. There's so many takeaways in there, and it, doesn't just, the presentation's one example, but you can see where this applies to so many instances, or other things in life.
Yeah, I really love how you've made your definition of confidence very accessible for everyone, because I think a lot of people who may not feel confident, they tend to sort of view that as something they hope to achieve one day, but probably won't ever achieve. And so it kind of, everything that you've just said sort of reminded me of someone who once told me, because I'm someone who takes everything to heart. I take a lot of things personally sometimes too. And one of the things that person told me was, any reaction you get is just information. Just view it as data for your collection. Yes. And so that's really helped me figure out, okay, I'm telling myself a story, and it's not a good story, but it definitely helps you put things into a different perspective and change your mindset about your situation. And I think that's very empowering. And yeah, everything you just said is just like, that makes total sense.
I mean, on the story front, it's a really good point. We tell ourselves a story, which quite frankly is more than often an illusion. I mean, it makes sense to us in our heads. We're like, yeah, that must be real. But more than often we have no, like, we wouldn't win in court if we had to go and give that as evidence in court, for example. So, and I'll give you another real life example that happened like last week. When we get trapped in those stories, and why it often doesn't help when somebody tries to haggle with the story. So for example, I do lake swimming. I don't know if you guys know that, but when there was a small group of us, but there was one lady that was going out, and it was a lot deeper than normal. So this is, you know, so around this lake is about 3/4 of a mile. It's 40 meters deep. It's quite cold at the moment in the UK. So long story short, this lady was beginning to get worried about it, and she was talking like, well, it's really deep. What happens if I get cramp? And what happens if I, you know, have a panic attack? Or what happens, blah, 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 panic, panic, panic. And everybody was like, look, you're a great swimmer. Like, you're going to be fine. Like, just stick with us, whatever. So there was this haggling going on. So in all she ended up with is one side of her brain saying, holy, like, this is scary. And you got the other side of the brain of everybody trying to convince her, like, reassure her, which was well intended, right? I'm not trying to criticize what people are doing. It's very normal to try and reassure somebody of the opposite when they say something that isn't helpful for them, like, I might drown in a lake kind of thing. So actually my approach to this, because it wasn't going anywhere, and the more people tried to haggle with her, the more she got scared, and this narrative went from left to right, all the way around a few times. So my response to it is, look, you've got this swim, and basically let's just embrace that going out there at 40 meters is a bit scary. Like, it doesn't personally scare me. I didn't say that to her, but you know, it doesn't mean that it's scary for everybody. But I said, look, I can tell for you, this is scary for you. So rather than taking it as like trying to find a way around it, how about, I need to be brave right now? And she absorbed that. I'm like, yeah, do you know what? I'm not going to fight the anxiety. I'm not going to try and convince myself that it's not scary, but I'm going to embrace the fear. And the bottleneck was, you know, the willingness to be brave. So I said, like, rather than trying to fight it, just say, yeah, this is scary and I need to be brave right now. But what that did was just create enough to overstep the blockage. And once she's then overstepped the blockage, she gets out there and she swims, and then she felt brilliant for doing it, because the confidence comes from after you've taken the action. But up until that point, the bottleneck, it was beginning to close and close and close, which was going to stop her from taking action. So these methods and tools aren't to like change people's lives, it's to stop, to overcome the blockages, and then the confidence follows from taking the action of something. So it's just to like get people past that hurdle. And that's just a little example of how a value can be more useful than fighting the narrative, which is the story, as you've mentioned.
Thanks, Angie. That's really insightful. And I guess moving from that, we're in a growing business. We're always looking to I guess, offer new challenges to people where we can, and that includes new roles or changes within their roles. And so with this kind of fighting the narrative, maybe this is going to come back in. I would, you know, a few of the people we asked fed back that it can be quite intimidating to step into a new role. They might see a new role advertised on our like internal system and think, that's not for me, or I shouldn't apply, even though secretly there's a desire to try it. So yeah, the question is, what's your advice on tackling that fear of applying for a new role, or even the stress of being in a new role, and being successful in it?
So in terms of the applying, I just want to throw this back over to you just gently. So when people say it's intimidating, what is the story that they're hearing that is making it intimidating? Because feeling intimidated is a symptom and a reaction to something. So what is the story that you think those people are feeling when they're seeing this job as intimidating? What are they scared of?
I mean, I'm going to say it's probably fear of not making it, not getting the role, or fear of failure.
Right.
Or fear of not having all of the qualifications on the list in the job description too.
I'm not good enough. I suppose there's a few things in there, but yeah.
Okay, cool. So when people, so it gets interesting. So when people feel that they shouldn't apply for something because they might fail or whatever the case is, or they might not get it. Let's go with might not get it first. What they're basically saying is, I'm scared of not getting this job. Well, by not applying, they're guaranteeing that they're going to get the outcome that they're telling me that they're scared of getting. So it's very twofold, isn't it? So one sense they're saying I'm scared of not getting the job, and on the other sense, by not applying, they're guaranteeing the thing that they're scared of. So when you reverse it like that, whichever way you cut it, you've only got one opportunity to avoid the thing that you're trying to avoid, which is by applying. Secondly, around not being good enough, that often is a story driven by fear. So when fear kicks in, it has one objective, and it will show up in a number of different ways to basically stop us from doing the thing that we're scared of. So it will tell us stories with a story and then an instruction. So in this instance, the story would be, I'm not good enough. The instruction is don't apply because you might not get it, whatever. So when we recognize those stories for what they are, we stop attaching to them as truth. If we're taking heed of that story and then taking heed of that instruction, we're attaching to that story as truthful. And actually, that's just fear in full swing to try and protect us from the thing that it's scared of doing, which is to apply. So in those instances, I get people to try and tap into the fear part and embrace that rather than listening to the story, because that story can start escalating of, well, what happens if I applied and everybody found out, and then people would laugh at me, and if they laughed at me, maybe that would spread and nobody would want to speak to me. I'm kind of making this up on the fly, but these stories can start escalating and cycling upwards, and before you know it, you've got this story that you're going to lose your job, you're going to lose your house, like everything's going to go wrong, all because of this one thing that basically you're scared of doing, and that's fear driving that. So recognizing it for what it is. And the other thing, when I say what it is in like it's fear rather than a real life story. But also people have these beliefs of like, oh, I'm not good enough. But actually, if you say to somebody, well, what is enough? Most people can't answer that with accuracy. So if you don't have a real measurement of what is enough, how can you tell me that you're not good enough? And if their answer to that is, well, I've got to have all these things on this job spec, then that's a bit of perfectionism creeping in. Because if the only way you're good enough is that you've got everything on that job spec, then why would you want the job anyway? Like the idea of going into a new role is to develop. The idea of going into a new role is to, move up. So if you've got every single thing on that job spec, then there's no room for development there. So who is it that you're kidding in this moment? Is it that you truly believe that you're not good enough, or why are you applying for this job? Is it that you want to develop? Is it actually a job upwards or not? Why do you want a job that you've got every single thing on the spec? You'd be bored out your brain in about 2 weeks, surely. So, but when we start breaking these stories down in our own heads, we can start, it enables us to start moving forward because we recognize them for the BS stories that they are, as opposed to real life stories that then serve to be a blockage to stop us from taking action.
I love that, especially the role piece. If you already take everything on the spec, then why are you applying? Are you going to grow, develop, enjoy, and learn in that role? And even from an employer perspective, that's really interesting. When we're going out and hiring people and the people that come to us, is there room for development for them in there? Yeah, thank you. Okay.
So just looking at the time, we've already spent 28 minutes. So I wonder if we could open up the floor to a couple of quick questions. I do see that there's a few questions in the chat right now from George. He's asking, is there confusion between assertiveness and confidence?
I don't really understand the question. How do they mean, like confusion?
Maybe about what's the difference maybe between confidence and being assertive. I think sometimes being assertive can have negative connotations of being quite direct in communication. And I know that everyone's sort of got different communication styles, so we kind of dance around the topic rather than saying directly what we need in that moment.
Sure. Okay. So I have a very unique way, should I say, in terms of training assertiveness, I think is very effective, and it enables people to speak with pure transparency, but in a way that is very, very unlikely, or certainly less likely to trigger somebody. But when somebody has confidence, they fundamentally respect themselves. They fundamentally have boundaries, and they're firmly in place. Assertiveness is when we feel that those boundaries have been broken. So that's different. I mean, I suppose it can also be in a meeting when you want to voice maybe a controversial opinion. And to do that, then you might feel vulnerable, and then that will take confidence to do it. So if you want to voice a controversial opinion in a meeting, you might risk rejection, you might miss judgment, you might risk, I don't know, being seen in a particular way. Even though they're generally stories that aren't actually accurate, that's often the thing that stops people speaking out. But There's also the form of assertiveness when somebody has been rude or disrespectful, and therefore that's a case of boundaries and understanding where your boundaries are. And when somebody has overstepped that line, my main priority is just to get them back into their space again. Like, I'm not going to attack them back, but they don't have a right to cross that boundary. And that would be maybe when I've interpreted what they've said as disrespectful. So I think there's two types of assertiveness. One's the willingness to be vulnerable and outspoken and voice something that might be shamed or criticized or judged. And then there's the assertiveness when people are crossing boundaries. But to couple that with confidence, I'm still a bit confused by how can they get confused, but fundamentally, the more confident you are, the more able you are to be assertive. Often when people aren't confident, they find that ability to be assertive very, very difficult. Excuse me. Because there's the fear of upsetting the other person. And then most people who have, and it doesn't mean they have to be a very unconfident person, but if people have areas of confidence development, shall we say, the fear of conflict is massive. Like, people get terrified with conflict, when actually you can have a very direct conversation with somebody. You can be incredibly kind, you can be incredibly respectful to them and to yourself. You can put your point across without it being derogatory or with an intention to try and dominate or win against the other person. You're just voicing your opinion. That's when you're delivering assertiveness with confidence. When somebody is often seen as being aggressive, that to me is not assertive, that's aggressive. And often that is coming from a place of unconfidence, because a confident person doesn't need to dominate and overpower the other person in order to get the point across. So unless you're kind of trained to see this, I guess it could be quite difficult to understand the difference. But excuse me, if somebody is being aggressive, I wouldn't consider that assertive, whereas some people be like, oh my god, they're so assertive, or they're too assertive, whereas actually too assertive doesn't exist. Because when you're truly assertive, you're respecting the other person's boundaries and you're respecting your own boundaries. Aggressive is when you're not respecting the other person's boundaries and you're dominating over their boundaries. So there is a difference.
That's clear, thank you. I'm hoping we can squeeze in another question. So do you think we all wear a mask of some sort at times, from Karen?
I think all is a loaded, not loaded, but it's a very large word. I would say a huge proportion of society wear a mask. I know plenty of people that don't, and it's liberating, because I really feel like I can connect with those people because they're shameless. They're open to sharing things that other people might be scared of sharing. I personally used to wear a massive mask, like a massive game face, and it's soul crushing. Because the whole purpose behind wearing a mask is because the message that the brain gets is that who I am isn't actually good enough. And I need to be this person who I'm not in order for people to like me, in order to get other people's approval, and in order to be good enough. So that's why it damages us when we don't feel that we can just show up as who we truly are. So I used to wear a massive game face, but I've been in coaching quite intensively for a number of years. I'm confident to say that very rarely I wear a game face now. I'm happy to admit emotions that other people would be embarrassed to say. How vulnerable I am will be dependent on the audience. Like, if I was having a very deep conversation with my boyfriend, that might be very different from what I'd share in this call now. So there's a time and a place for everything, but I wouldn't try and pretend something that I'm not, or pretend I'm not feeling in a particular way, because that game face is so damaging. But to answer the question, I would say a huge proportion. I'm literally making this up, but if I had to hazard a guess, I'd say probably 90–95% of the population, particularly in the workplace, are wearing a game face, or wearing a mask, sorry, as the phrase is.
Yeah, that makes sense. And particularly in the workplace. So the final question that we had here, which was a great question, is what resources could you recommend, if any, to reinforce the information that you've given for those that struggle with confidence?
Resources, okay. So in terms of books, there's a number of different ones, really. One of my favorites is a book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza. I love that book. It can get quite spiritual. That works for me, but that won't necessarily work for everybody. But even from a just a biological perspective, the way he describes the way the brain works, the neural pathways, and how to break that and change neural pathways is outstanding. So it works for a spiritual level and a non-spiritual level. I found that book brilliant. There are books. There's another book. It's a bit like old school. It was written in the 80s, but it's called The Big Leap by a guy called Gay Hendricks. But it's like typical middle class white guy. So, and it's in the 80s. So I'd still say that the way he's worded it is a bit dated, but in terms, if you just remove away from that and just take out the essence of the book, I think it's a brilliant book. And things like like the Chimp Paradox is one that people talk about quite a lot, because it just gives you it breaks down the way that we react to different situations. That's by, hold on, I've got it on my wall, Professor Stephen Peters. But that gives us just an understanding how the brain works and how our chimp is released and what we can do. I don't think it's massively self-development based in terms of like you'll get this huge development from it, but I do think it gives you good insight to how the brain works and how we can react to things. And I also think we need to break down things like, so once we realize that we are confident or we're not confident, or maybe we're somewhere in the middle, and that's a big old scale, it isn't one or the other, you can be on a spectrum within that. What type of behaviors that we have, so what type of friendship groups we have, what type of relationships we have. And a game-changing book that I always recommend to my clients who are in maybe a relationship that isn't quite as healthy as they'd like it to be, or as upbeat as they'd like it to be, or as connected as they'd like it to be, is a book called Attached. Can't remember who wrote it, but it's an absolutely, the cover is a white book with a red love heart on the front. So it's written by 2 people, but I can't remember the author's name, sorry, but it is an absolute brilliant book if somebody feels that they're in a relationship that then is serving to not serve their own confidence. Positioning yourself in good situations can also help how you feel about yourself, and being around people who are putting you down or not being particularly kind to you doesn't help you if you're already in a low place or not a particularly good place. So changing your lifestyle of things you can take action on straight away, and all the other stuff can come through taking action over time and repetition.
That's amazing. I've made a note of all of those so that we can share them with the team afterwards, and I'll find some links for them as well. But I know if we've gone over, but massively appreciate your time and all of the answers that you've given today. So yeah, thank you for joining us, and everyone, thanks for coming along as well. Leah, anything to add?
No, I think I pretty much said the same thing. We have these Lucideon exchange sessions so that we can learn and be curious together. And I think I'm speaking for everyone here that we've really learned a lot. And I think this has also made us a lot more curious about ourselves too, when we look at ourselves and are becoming more self-aware of exactly how we're feeling and being okay with embracing how we're feeling. I think that's just a really important takeaway for us, is that, we have to kind of come to terms with how we're feeling and accept that first before we can take that next step. So I think that's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it. This is a really interesting session for us.
No worries. Thank you for having me. And going to lift you up on your interviewing skills, both of you. Like, neither of you interrupted, and you're both very easy to be interviewed by. So thank you for that. Brilliant.
No, thank you. Take care.
Cheers, guys.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.